A couple things right quick. I was trying to tell the men in the back about someone that we needed to pray for, and it came to me. The Weavers have been down with COVID. He's better, but she's still fighting. So keep Trina and Larry in your prayers. Also, we want to congratulate Ashlyn Fowler. She signed with Hendrix College in Oklahoma to play softball on their team, but also to be a student. We're excited for them and this great accomplishment. Luke tells us that if the people had known Jesus, they would not have crucified him. But look at all that he did. The great wonders, the miracles, the healings, the teaching that he gave to the apostles, the example that he left. It's hard in my mind to understand why they wanted to kill him. So this morning I want us to focus on his death. Why did he die? Why did he have to die? Why did men want him dead and out of the way? These basic truths, when understood, will help us face each day to know what he really did, to appreciate what he did, and that he did it for each of us. And when we personalize it, he did it for me. Life will be easier. Being faithful, living the Christian life will have more meaning. We will have more strength to face all the things that we had to face. Why did Jesus die? No, Pilate, the governor at that time over Judea, was handling the matter because the Israelites could not perform capital punishment to kill someone because they were a conquered people. They had to bring Jesus to the Romans. And Pilate examined them, looked at the evidence. He wasn't completely unaware about this man who had drawn crowds, multitudes, to hear and see what he did while walking on this earth. And he even says, I find this man innocent. He is not guilty. I guess he was just as confused why they wanted to kill him. But he washed his hands and he says, it is not up to me. I leave it to you. But he could have released them. He could have done the right thing. Was he weak? I imagine as a governor, being responsible to Caesar, he had to keep peace in Palestine. And he knew the possibility of an uprising if he went against the people. And for their benefit, to show them favor, he allowed them to take Jesus to Mount Golgotha and to crucify him on a cross between two thieves. No, I don't look at what if he had released them. We know it was God's will from the very beginning. The people wanted him dead because they were jealous. These religious people who were, one of the covenant rules was, thou shalt not kill. And yet, right and left, these were evil men, bending the law to their will, to their judgment. Yes, they were jealous because the people followed him. I can imagine it went through their mind that as they turned from them, worshiping under the law of Moses, going to the temple, going to the synagogues, offering sacrifices, when they were converted to Christ, all that came to an end. And so they wanted it to stop. Their very positions were threatened. They wanted him out of the way. And as we studied the Gospel of Matthew, we saw that turning point when they admired and recognized and lauded him as a great one. Then the religious leaders saw, and they, from that point on, tried to trap him in his own words, trap him in his actions, whereby they could, without guilt of conscience, say, we found him not to be innocent, but to be guilty. And they sought to get him out of the way. They wanted to kill him. What was Jesus' crimes? Well, when he was eating with the people who were called sinners by the elite, the outcast of the religion, they didn't understand why he would associate with them, to eat with these people there in Mark chapter 2. The healing on the Sabbath. They said, this is sinful. It was just a certain minimal things that they could do on the Sabbath. And they even made extra rules to prevent people from having such freedom. Remember the time he drove the money changers out of the temple with a whip? Do not merchandise the house of God. They were putting high, exorbitant prices on these animals that people needed that came from a far distance. And Jesus saw the hypocrisy, and he drove them out. There was a righteous anger that he had that day against those people. Even when people would bow down and worship him, he wouldn't stop them. And this infuriated the religious leaders of these tribes, of these Sadducees and Pharisees. No, but he was blamed for many things. Many things that he said he was going to do. How about forgiving sins? How about when he came from heaven? God sent me. These things bothered them tremendously. Even when he says, I existed before this time. John 8:58. When he claimed to be the only way of salvation. John 14, verse 6. I imagine this hit a sore spot. When he says, I'm the bread of life and the living bread. John 6:35 and verse 48. When he says, I'm the light of the world. John 8:12. I'm the good shepherd. Chapter 10, verse 11. There, once again, at 14, I am the way, the truth, and the life. This is what he's guilty of. It's truth. They called it blasphemy. But he wasn't blaspheming. He was telling them the truth. But in actuality, his guilt, he was more righteous than them. His holiness outshined them. His being without sin shamed them, and they couldn't stand it because he was like his Father. We read in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 16, and that he might reconcile them both, that's the Jews and the Gentiles, into one body through the cross, thereby putting to death the enmity. Not only the difficulty of the relationship or the non-relationship between the Gentiles and the Jews, but also the enmity toward God. That was between the people and God because of sin. There's 4 things. I've got them underlined there. That's important. That helps us go deeper. The who, what, where, and how. Who provided this sacrifice? Of course, it's Jesus, the Christ, the Messiah, the Prince of Peace, the captain of our salvation. That's who we're talking about. Let's don't point fingers at anyone else to give glory to than God and His Son. The what? It's the reconciliation that He made possible. He came to bring peace and to bring together once again, like the relationship in the Garden of Eden when Adam and Eve walked with God. But when Satan came, sin entered the picture and they were cast from the garden. Ephesians talks about the blessings that Jesus gives us. That is because of the reconciliation. Him being the propitiation, the payment for sin. The ransom that is available because of His death, burial, resurrection. And because of that, we are justified. But where is this brought to full picture? He brought all the Gentiles and the Jews into one body. As they obeyed the gospel, He added them to the church. Acts chapter 2, verse 47. He declares there in Ephesians chapter 1 that the body and the church are the same thing. That's the importance, is the kingdom of Christ on this earth and being followers of Christ, disciples, children of His, and in fellowship with one another in that body that He has given us. How's it all done? Through that cruel cross. He's being nailed up. To be suspended from in between heaven and earth for all the world to see. Ephesians chapter 1, verse 7 says this. In whom we have redemption through His blood, the forgiveness of sins according to the riches of His grace. There's the example of why His death is so important for us to realize and focus upon. And Peter tells us that it's all because of the sacrifice, the blood that was shed from the cross. And the preaching that we offer today to the world is the preaching of the good news. That Jesus died, and the result of that is we don't have to die a second death. We have freedom from sin, freedom from being judged sinful. How can that be good news about someone dying? We don't like to hear about death. But He didn't die. He wasn't perfect. It wasn't permanent. He continued to live and returned to the Father. Yes, He conquered death. He destroyed Satan. Hebrews chapter 2, verse 14 and 15 says this. For inasmuch then as the children are partakers of flesh and blood, He also Himself likewise took part of the same, that through death He might destroy him that had the power of death, that is, the devil, and deliver them who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage. You talk about freedom. He's released us from that fear. When we become Christ-like, there's a victory that He grants to us, 1 Corinthians 15:59. And we don't have to die that second death, Revelation 21, verse 8. But He didn't die in vain. He didn't stay in that tomb. That tomb is empty. Through His resurrection, we have what it says here in Romans 1, verse 4. And he's declared to be the Son of God with power, according to the Spirit of holiness, by the resurrection of the dead, even Jesus Christ our Lord. Look at Romans chapter 6, verse 3 and 4, and understand that that resurrection of coming from the grave is the same thing that you and I experience when we come out of the watery grave of baptism. That like as Christ was raised, one day we will be raised in newness of life. A lot of times we read obituaries about the death of loved ones or friends or acquaintances. Some people check their newspaper every day to read the obituaries, see where they are. Did Jesus have an obituary? We'll read about his birth, his parents, and the importance of his fulfilling the genealogy, both of his father Joseph and of his mother Mary, in Luke chapter 3. We read about his life, of his works, and we read about his death. The events coming to that time when he died on the cross. And what happened to his body being buried in a tomb, one that was borrowed or given, so that Jesus would have a place to rest. But it doesn't stop there. His death is not permanent. His tomb's not his final resting place. He came not for an ending, but for a beginning. That's the important thing that we need to focus on. He had the power over sin, the power over Satan, the power over death itself. The keys of the kingdom from death and hell, they reside in his hands forever. Revelation 1:18. Those who believe in him shall live forever, despite the temporary death that we face. Oh, what an accomplishment by his resurrection, what he gives us. But it didn't stop there. He returned to the Father. He ascended. And those men chosen by Jesus in his ministry to be disciples, who became the apostles, saw him ascend. Put yourself there as they stand watching, as Jesus has encouraged them, challenged them, go into all the world, beginning at Jerusalem and all in Judea and unto Samaria and the uttermost parts of the world, to evangelize and teach this message of Christ and his death for all people. And they went. Paul tells us in Colossians chapter 1, verses 23 through 28, that was accomplished. That every soul had heard the message. That's after his death, isn't it? Surely, if he came back to live and on the earth, they wouldn't kill him again, would they? But you know, the writer of Hebrew warns us not to crucify Jesus a second time. When we disregard his life, his truth, his doctrine, his church, the need of our obedience, it's like putting Jesus on the cross again. You know, it won't accomplish that goal as it does the first time if we kill him the second time. He died that we might live, 2 Corinthians 5. His stripes heal us. His blood purchased the church. The water resembles or is symbolic of the cleansing that we get because of his sacrifice. I want to compare the altar and the cross. There it is. You know, the Old Testament, especially in Leviticus, it talks about the sacrifices the Israelites were privileged to do for certain sins and to find forgiveness. It wasn't a complete forgiveness because the Israelites had to roll their sins ahead a year. And every year they had to recognize that same guilt. But why did God require blood? These Israelites understood You know, when it came time when the Israelites came to Jerusalem, to the temple, and prior to that to the tabernacle in the wilderness, all these people brought various animals. And they were presented before the altar, before the door of the tabernacle, or before the temple. And these animals were dispatched, I guess I'd politely say. They were killed. The blood was drained from their bodies. Can you imagine how much blood was flowing on the ground after thousands of animals are put to death? It was a bloody issue. Did the Israelites know something about this that you and I have forgotten? What the blood does, what the blood represented? Blood represented life. We understand the importance of transfusions when someone has a shortness in the volume of their blood in their body. These people, when they saw the blood at the altar, no wonder the purification process for these priests of washing their feet and their hands, they had blood all over them. And what about the death of Jesus? Before he got to the cross, the whipping, the flogging there at the whipping post, Jesus' blood splattered on the ground. With the thorns thrust on his head, the blood that came from his head. The blood that he shed on the cross, dripping at the foot of the cross. The soldiers stepping in, walking in it, their hands covered with it. And when they argued and gambled over his coat and cloak, probably their clothes became stained with his blood. What a bloody issue. May we understand the importance of the need for that price for sin. The purging of our conscience from dead works to serve the living God. Hebrews 9, verse 14. When the Jewish people looked at the bloody altar, they realized the reality of sin. What will we do when we look at Christ's suffering, the blood that he shed? How will we respond? With gratitude? With appreciation? With a changed life? No longer looking at the little things that we want, desire. We can put these things aside. We can sacrifice them. We can live with less, knowing that the kingdom is supported and our service and discipline will help the church grow. It's a little thing that we can give compared to what? And the totality of what he gave. He gave us all. He left heaven. He came to this earth. He left and returned to the Father, giving us a victory and a newfound appreciation for that sacrifice, because we have forgiveness and we have fellowship one with another. Why did he die? He died because his Father sent him. He obeyed his Father. Why did he die? He died that we would not face a second death. But one day we would be reunited with him in heaven. Doesn't that drive you? Doesn't that push you? Doesn't that cause you to say, God, I want to do more. I want to give more. I want to convince more people. Help them to know what I know. The love of Jesus. Yes, he died for you and me. Will we show him our appreciation by the way we live our lives? Oh, let's be close to him and in his church, with one another. If you have any need of responding to the invitation of Christ this day, we encourage you. May all that He did cause you to respond while we stand and while we sing.